Welcome, Dr. Gildiner. Thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books.
Thank you for inviting me.
Good morning, Monster. This book captivated me, interested me, horrified me. Wow. I'm particularly interested in Laura and Madeline. I can't stop thinking about their stories and all the stuff they went through as kids. I have so many questions.
Okay.
So first of all, can you just tell listeners what your book, Good Morning Monster, is really about and what inspired you to write this?
Good Morning Monster is following 5 patients who've had a really traumatic life. And I guess I got sick of reading all these sad cases all the time about how people just bottomed out. And I thought, wow, I've had people who've lived through absolute hell and they've managed to cling and maintain to their sanity. So I wanted to write about psychological heroes. You know, heroes are always these action figures, right? And I wanted to write about how these people, to be a hero, you have to fight against something that's much bigger than you. That otherwise you're not a hero, right? So, these people managed to do that and they managed to come out with their sanity. And I wanted to say, you know what, this is heroic. And I think I was it was when Alana said to me one day, oh, I'm such a screw up. And I wanted to say, because she said, I taught this guy computer science and now he's, everyone knows him, but I'm the one that taught him. And I said, you know what? He had 2 parents who sent him to Harvard. He's been in, he had all these opportunities. And I said, if you lined up everybody who had been treated the way you've been treated, they'd be in back rooms of mental hospitals. Right. I said, you aren't seeing people that have been treated the way you have, and you would see that you're a real hero. So I wanted them to see, because they were, people compare themselves to other people who've had advantages, or normal parents. And they say, what's wrong with me? So I wanted people to see, a lot can go wrong and you can still pull it out.
Wow. So this is not your first book. In fact, you talk in this book about how you left your practice for a while, right, wrote, and then were dragged back in by a very persuasive Duncan who you couldn't take no for an answer.
I know.
So tell me about this sort of intersection in your life between therapy and writing, and what made you stop therapy for a while, start writing, and now meld the two like this?
Right. Well, I joke that at age 50, I ran out of empathy. I had just worked too hard. And then I said, okay, I also wrote a column for Chatelaine, which is kind of like, Red Book or Good Housekeeping in the US. I wrote it in Canada. And so it's, giving unwanted advice to people that haven't asked for it. And so I wrote that for 15 years. And people said, oh, you have a turn of phrase and you should do this or that or the other thing. And then I was at a dinner party once and someone said, oh, I was 16 years old and, I was so terrified to go to camp and blah, blah, blah. And I thought, wow. I said, didn't your parents ever have you get a job? And they said, no. She said, never. Because they like me to take courses in the summer. And I said, well, I don't understand that because I worked full time from the age of 4. So then people said, oh my God, you should write that up, right? So I wrote my first memoir and I was shocked. It was on the bestseller list for 150 weeks or something. Then I wrote the second and the third, and then my life ended at 25 when I married, right? So I didn't write anymore. Life is over when you have children and marry, right? As the title of your blog says. Yeah. And then I wrote a novel about my PhD because I was interested in the philosophy of science on Darwin's influence on Freud. And then it took me, honestly, 25 years. I think I was so burned out from being a therapist that after 25 years, I started thinking about all of these people and they kept coming into my mind. And I was walking down the street one day with a friend and there was a guy, very sad man, lying on a grate trying to get warm, homeless. And she said, look at him. He's able-bodied. He's 25 years old. Why can't he walk in and ask somebody for a job? And I just thought, you have no idea what this person has gone through. If they didn't have arms and legs, you'd feel sorry for them, right? But you don't see what's gone on in somebody who's had a horribly difficult life. You don't. If you could see their brain or you could see all their memories, you'd say, oh, that poor thing. but people don't. So I thought I am going to write that book, yeah, people like Alana kept coming back to my mind. So I wanted to write it, but I needed a long break before I wrote. Yeah.
How did you pick these patients? And I know you said there's sort of some are composites and you didn't use real names, but how did you come up with these 5 for Good Morning Monster?
Well, it's really ridiculous because I'm a quantitative person. So what I did was I said, I have to go over every patient that I've had. First of all, I sat down and made a list of these 5 when I thought of writing the book. And then I went over every file, said, maybe I should do this. Maybe the demographic would be better if I did that. Maybe I went through all this stuff. And then I just did the first 5 that were still in my heart. It wasn't, I thought, I went through all the marketing stuff and all that. And I thought, it doesn't matter. If I don't write about people that are still in my psyche after 25 years, it's not going to work. So those were the 5 people that I came up with.
I thought it was really interesting that you said that good therapy, there has to be some sort of connection. Like you can't not like your patient. You have to, it doesn't have to be like is the wrong word, but you have to feel that sort of bond with them in some way to go through it. Tell me a little more about that.
Well, when I say you have to like your patient, you have to bond in some way to that patient. Like I for a number of years I worked in a psychiatric hospital in forensic. Those are psychiatric problems, but also criminals, right? So even if they said, I killed my mother, I couldn't take another second, right, of my stepmother. I had to sort of empathize with that. And I had to say, oh, okay. But then I had to see it totally from his perspective, right? And sometimes you can't see other people's perspective. Like there's certain things that, like, for example, I don't see obsessive compulsives because I just don't relate. Because they obsessively talk about the same thing, right? So, So, in a lot of that, I try not to see people where the thing that there's something a little bit wrong with their brain. Like with obsessives, they usually are born that way, right? So I would much rather see like somebody who is perfectly okay and then just got off the path, and then I like to work together to bring them back. But there are people that you just don't click with. Actually, I was saying this the other day. Sorry, but they cut the grass today, and I think they put napalm on it or something. It's killing me. But what my editor pointed out, which is silly because I'm a psychologist and I should have seen this myself, is that every single one of those people, women in the book, were raised by their father. Yeah. And I was too. So I thought, oh my gosh, that is, I didn't see that ever. Right. And I thought, how could I not have seen that? Because it's true of all the women. Like, the mothers are distant figures or troubled figures, and the father is the major parent. So I think unconsciously I related to that.
I feel like this book is also one of those truth is stranger than fiction examples, because if you had made this up, it would have been too far-fetched. Do you know what I mean? That parents could leave, for instance, that a father could leave his 3 kids in a cabin in the woods, and have a 9-year-old take care of them, and that another father, and even that a couple could go off to Russia and leave their 11-year-old daughter alone in the house for months. It's like, I don't know, some of these things I'm like, could this really happen? And yet it did. And you have to deal with the aftermath. And I thought another really interesting part of this story was that some of the things that seem so obvious to us as like sort of, not to call myself normal in any way, but let's just say like, I don't know. I don't know. Well, as a regular reader of this could obviously see the huge holes in the parenting and the detriment done, and yet the patients themselves saw it as just life, right? Like they didn't know any different.
Absolutely. Like look at Laura. When the father left her, she said, "What is the problem? I was already 8 years old. Mm-hmm. I could handle that." Right. And so I had to spend a lot of time explaining what an 8-year-old can do. I took her to see 8-year-olds.
That was so great. I loved that. Yes.
And so she saw all of them, but she's kind of funny in her own way, amusing. So when we got in the car, I said, well, and she said, well, they were immature. So, it took her a long time because the father was like, I need you to be an adult. And she said, okay, if you love me and I'll be an adult. That was their deal. right? He never criticized her, but she had to be the adult. And I mean so her childhood wasn't that hard. But what was hard was when she was an adult and she began looking for men to be with. She always picked people that she had to take care of because she was bonded to that behavior.
Yeah.
She misunderstood bonding for love.
And I feel like you're so good, obviously, at seeing all these patterns that the patients themselves can't even see. Even like Madeline, in terms of how she staffed her company, right?
Oh.
That you can recreate, which is something I had never really thought about before. That you hear about, people marrying spouses that have some of the characteristics of their parents that they're still sort of wrestling with.
Yeah.
But it hadn't occurred to me that people do this in the workplace. That you could have people work for you who have the same thing. Tell me a little about that.
Well, that was something that Madeline and I worked on all the time, because she always made the point that she was in a very specialized field, So she'd say, well, he's the only person in the world that can do this, right? Mm-hmm. And I would say, that's ridiculous. He's rude all the time. Like if he would see me, he'd say, "Are you here again?" I mean, this is ridiculous behavior, right? She said, "No, we all have to put up with it but I said, "No, you had to put up with your mother because you didn't have a choice." But yes, he is the only Hungarian that can understand, 14th century religious iconography, but I'm sure there are others, So, I mean, she surrounded herself with incredibly difficult clients. Like people that were in the mafia in other countries, et cetera. And they had, it was just awful. Because, I mean, who has millions and millions of dollars, right? Some very good people and some people that are bad, right? So she would be like, they would then not pay their bill. And I'd left all of that out because I didn't want to be killed myself. But I mean, she recreated her family.
And her family was, I mean, the insanity that happened with her mother, her biological mother, and then Kathy, who her father ends up with next.
Oh,
it's like unthinkable that her stepmother would essentially break all of the antiques in her childhood home, not let her back in, and that this sort of went on.
And that the father would tolerate it.
Yeah, that just kept going on. And he's like, sorry,
Yeah, I know. And that's when she had her huge collapse, was after that antique thing. And then I think he felt so guilty that he actually followed me to a coffee shop every day and said, please be her therapist. I said, I'm retired. I'm, finally he's a successful businessman, right? He wore me down, right?
Yeah.
So I finally said, okay, I will do it. But I mean, people think, oh, I wanted to include Madeline because people think people that have a lot of wealth are happy and that money really makes you happy. I mean, it's so trite, right? But what they don't realize is that, like, very often, like, he was from a very independently wealthy family, goes back generations in Canada, and his name is a very common name now in the newspapers and everything. And there were gold diggers after him. Right. I mean, that's what, it's an old fashioned term. Right. Mm-hmm. But this is before women, this is in the 30s. Right. This is before women had a chance to be what they wanted to be. So your only chance in life was marry this wealthy guy. So her mother sent her to the Hamptons and said, don't come home unless you're engaged to him. Right. And so, I mean, you can say, why would you marry someone so awful? Well, she put on a really good act for about 4 or 5 months. And then she recognized that he wasn't the type to get a divorce. We don't divorce in our family, that sort of thing. But it also, I mean, the wealth covers a lot of pathology. I mean, because when they went to, the editor pointed this out to me, and that's when I included it in the book. If you had, like Laura was abandoned in a, in a tiny cabin, right? But Madeline was abandoned too. Yes. She, her parents went to Russia, and then, the alarms went off, the alarm from a storm, the police came, and the police were terrified of the family because they lived in a huge estate. And they said, oh, well, okay, I guess she'll be okay. If they lived in a housing project, they would have immediately called CAS and gotten help for her. But, they were insulated by this wealth. And then, neurosis didn't appear as neurosis.
So interesting. Oh my gosh. I know, I couldn't believe that whole scene, and that the neighbor had to get her housekeeper's daughter to come visit. And
that housekeeper's daughter is still with her.
No way.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah. She's has made several moves with her, and still, yeah. So that is an interesting bond.
It was also funny to me that you admitted several times mistakes that you felt like you had made in your treatment. And I guess you know that like therapists must make mistakes, but I had never really thought through how much that would stay with you, or what you would view as a mistake and why. And anyway, tell me about some of that and like the regret of some of the ways you've handled things versus all the great things, you know.
Right. Yeah. Well, when I wrote the book, I wanted to show how much I'd grown as a therapist. And people, when you first start out, you don't know anything, right? You know everything in books, and you can get straight A's and feel really confident. But my first patient was Laura, who walked in and said, "I'm not giving a history."
Yeah.
Forget it. Those are the village idiots. She said, "I'm not giving a history." And I thought, oh my God, this isn't like school at all. And I mean, every single case I saw, you'd say, "I'm collecting a history." Like, even if they were psychotic and said they were the Virgin Mary, they gave a history, right?
Yeah.
So I thought, suddenly I realized I'm the one that's going to, let me move my phone. I'm the one that has to make this happen during the hour that it's happening. Like, it's only 50% academic. The rest of it is finding a way for these people to deal with people's defenses, So, oh, this is ridiculous. Let me turn this off.
Okay.
Let me turn this off. This is a new phone.
Oh, okay.
Right. There. Okay, found the button. All right. Yeah. So, so I thought it would. The whole thing would be, I'm going to show how I learned with each case, and then by the end, I'll be like, a pretty good therapist. Right. The opposite happened. Right. But I made majority of mistakes in my last case, which was the Madeline case. And I just couldn't figure out what I had done wrong. And then, I realized everybody has transference. Everybody, Duncan was very like my dad, starched shirt, vest every day, tie. And, he ran a business as well. She was an only child. They never ate at home. We never ate at home. The father always said, like, sometimes the mother would be so bad that both the father and the daughter would run into each other in the basement, and they would eat Cheerios together. Yeah, right. I know. So, but my mother wasn't bad at all. But I mean, I recognized all of these things that were similar, but I didn't understand, and I never held him responsible. I mean, I'd say, well, he can't do it. I guess he just can't, get his second wife to, let her in. But I never really laid into him about that. And he brought me into this chaotic scene of flying into New York with all of these, distractions all around me, where I was like, so, I mean, I shouldn't have allowed any of that. Right. And so then when I went and examined it, I realized it was like, he was like my dad. And my dad had a brain tumor and lost his mind at 45, I think, or 50. And so he was my father before everything fell apart. And I was protecting him, So anyway, one time somebody was looking at the paper and they looked at the picture of Duncan and said, "Gee, that looks like your dad." So it was like, it wasn't just me that thought that, right? But, I should have, but I did finally go and get my own therapy and said, like, what's going on here? And he said, it's so obvious. It's like, Psych 101, father attachment, so you have to be really careful of making those kinds of mistakes. Like what?
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, for the Danny thing, the Danny is, I don't know if you know that in Canada, you probably do, but, in the US, everything is a black-white race problem, right? I mean, that's the big problem. In Canada, it's native white issues. So that's the news every night. That's, because we have way more natives, and there's been a huge amount of, residential schools where everybody hasn't been parented. So that is sort of Canada's national problem, Canada's national disgrace, et cetera. So, so I mean, with Danny, the hard part for me was actually learning everything that I had to know about Native culture. Not that I learned everything, but that I had to then really hit the wall and not let my ego get the better of me and say, you know what, I can't cure him. I can take him to a certain spot, and then he has to go to a healer, he has to go and deal with all of this stuff with natives. That I had to say, this is as far as I can take you, and then he would, but I don't think I would have taken him anywhere if I hadn't had help from native psychiatrist at Harvard who really helped me. Like I'd say, well, why won't he talk? Right. And he said, he's getting to know you. And I thought, really, 2 months and this guy has not said a thing? And so then later I joked about it, like 5 years later when we were a lot closer. I said, yeah, like not talking for months. And he said, oh, he said, that didn't bother me. He said, he said, just what the guy told me. He said, I was getting to know you and I wasn't going to talk to somebody until I knew them. I said, but how did you know me without talking to me? And he said, that's just one way to know people.
Wow. That's crazy. It's amazing the way you've been able to get at all these people and get them past their circumstances and get them out of their own heads and get them to see. I mean, it's really like magic. Like, what do you think it is about the people who have become heroes in your practice? Like the people that have become heroes, and even sometimes in their own families, the other people, like in the case of Laura with her younger brother and sister whose lives did not follow her same trajectory. Like,
No,
what is it that makes somebody able to sort of withstand horrific circumstances, whereas somebody in the same family might not? There's probably not an answer to this, but.
No, but look at Laura. Okay. I mean, her brother and sister really didn't do well. And they did what you would expect from a life like that. Right.
Yes.
But remember, her father, even though he was neglectful, he was always singing her praises.
Mm-hmm.
He was always saying that, when she worked on the chip truck with him, and the town, just a sec, I have to, allergies are killing me.
That's
so,
okay.
Yeah. He always praised her, and he was like, oh, I knew you'd take care of things. Or I knew, you would do this. Hey, you're my number one man, he always said. So, I mean, she was loved in a conditional way. Like, if you do this for me, I'm going, and she saw him as, she thought he was kind of exciting and that's what a man was. And she thought, what is the big problem here? Why is everybody all upset about him? It wasn't as though he ever put her down, I think he did once when he was in jail and she wore jeans that he didn't like. And I said, wow, your father criticized you one time in your whole life? I mean, no wonder she was, and he didn't like the other two kids because they didn't have guts. She was born with a type A personality. He needed that. He reinforced that for his own needs. And her ego was built. I mean, it looks like she was neglected, and she was, but neglect is just one thing.
Wow.
Look at Danny, the next case. What about Danny? First 5 years were fine. Father was fine. Mother was fine. They lived in a happy home. They were hunters and gatherers, and they lived out in the woods. But they were a functioning unit. There was no alcoholism. They were a perfectly happy unit until he was taken, put in residential school, sexually abused. Parents lost their way of living. They said they couldn't live out in the woods anymore. They had to come in to a reserve. Then there was no job he could do because he was a hunter. So then he became an alcoholic. Everything fell apart. But the first 5 years, everything worked. When you look at someone like Madeline really saw the father as she finally recognized in the end that he loved her, but he had some sort of weakness with psychopathic women, and that was his weakness.
Yep.
And he couldn't stand up to them. And it's shocking that he would have a second one after the hell of the first one, right? So, and then sort of saying, okay, that's his weakness. Can I forgive him? I mean, that was part of her issue. And with the mother, I said, it's not important to forgive your mother, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's important is to see that she was a very damaged person. That she was so damaged, she couldn't love anyone. And she said, well, then why is she so mean to me? I could live with not being loved, right? And she went to private school, and she was on the tennis team and on the debating team, and she's gorgeous and everything. So you can say, she just couldn't be perfect enough. And I said, you know what it's like to be a mother and not be able to do the job? you're watching all these other mothers, which she called mother hens and overprotective, when they were really just being mothers.
Yep.
And so naturally you become hostile to this child who has needs, and you have no idea how to fulfill them.
You had one quote. I don't know if if I can find it or not, but no, you said something about how at one point you realized that you can stop being angry and upset with your mother and just feel sorry for your mother.
Yeah.
And like that transition is such a key point in the
Really?
therapy too.
Yes, absolutely. It's because your mother no longer has power over you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, when you say, okay, she's just a sad case,
Yeah.
and where it used to be like when, she would do this stuff of going to Florida to visit her and the mother would forget to pick her up, all that kind of stuff. And she just stopped doing it. She just said, I don't have to do that anymore. Right. And then she started going out with a very nice person, a nice man who was kind and good. She married a very wealthy guy who she thought would be just, like the dad, and he wasn't.
Yeah.
Right. He was much more, she married her mother, right? He turned out to be awful. So then toward the end of the therapy, she finally realized, oh, I can love this nice person. I didn't realize that I could love him. I thought I just could be friends with him.
Well, the way that you told these stories was so great because each one was sort of unputdownable in its own right? The unexpected twists and turns that actually happened, and then the way you handled it, it was so interesting. Tell me a little more about the writing of it, like the way that you crafted the stories. Was it just like, did you use all your notes, or like how did you make them into like these great standalone stories?
Right. Well, when I went back and looked at my notes, I thought they would be completely organized, and I thought, fantastic, I'll just put these notes in a book form and, it'll be perfect. I didn't know what I had said anything. It was, it said things like very upset, stuff like, I just thought these notes aren't helpful at all. Right. But then once in a while I would look at the notes and say, oh my God, I forgot that the father killed the cat. Right. I forgot that. Right. Like I repressed some of the awful stuff, but the conversations had to come back to me. And that's why you have to be kind of attached and bonded to those patients to remember those things. I mean, when you see somebody for 5 years, you can pretty well predict what they would say in different situations.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you must have enough stories to fill like 100 more books. Are you going to write any more books, or what's your plan?
My plan now is I'm writing. I grew up in a house in Lewiston, New York, which is on the Niagara River connecting to Canada. And I grew up in the New York side. So my family's home was involved in the Underground Railroad. And the house next door has 7 basements that go down to the river. I'm writing from the sort of white abolitionist point of view. Hope that works in this time of, So I'm doing that now. But a lot of people want me to write a book, or the publisher wants me to write a book like Good Morning Monster, but with more cases and lighter.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for aspiring authors?
Right. Just don't worry about it. I have people all the time saying to me, what's a good topic? What's hot today? How can I said, just you go into your heart and just write, like for 2 hours a day, at least, even if you have another job, just write for like 2 hours a day. I mean, because everybody starts writing when they have another job, or, they have to support themselves usually. Right. So I wrote for 2 hours before I went into my office. So I said, just write, and don't worry about any of it. Don't reread it. Don't do anything. Just let stream of consciousness take you. And then then go back and you can read it. Don't stop yourself at the end of each sentence and do all that, because the most important stuff comes from your unconscious. Most of it pours out, and then because that's the only thing that we all have in common. We all have a collective unconscious somewhere, so says Jung, so says Freud, so that people, I mean, why would people relate to a memoir of my 4-year-old delivery girl, delivering stuff with a black delivery car driver? Who cares? Only because the thoughts I had are the same thoughts they had when they were 4. So just get all of that out. Don't try to polish it and then later come back. I find a lot of people are like, they write 2 pages and then for, 4 weeks they try to make it perfect. And then by then you've lost it. You've lost all of your creative juices.
That's great advice. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Gildiner. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing your treatment stories with these incredible patients and for showing us what heroes really can look like. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Bye, Zibby.
Bye.